Good afternoon, and it's just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. It's the 19th of December 2013, so this year moving on pretty quickly. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and joining me in the studio today is Robert Green. Well, Robert, you've done some amazing work with the Holly Gregg campaign, and we're going to bring people up to date with that terrible story. What we can now see very clearly is a cover-up once again by the highest levels of the establishment, both north of the border and of course in Westminster. First of all though, before we move on to the main news, just a word on the weather, which has cleared up a little bit today. So we've got grey skies and it's reasonably dry. Last night of course was UK Column's Plymouth Christmas event, where we had horrific gales, torrential rain, flooding and problems on the road. So we lost some of our fellow revellers, but we still had a particularly good time. And can I say that Robert Green played some fairly mean guitar and vocals.
Mean, I think, is an overstatement, and the vocals definitely is an overstatement.
Well, there we are. And this is an important aspect of the work that we are all doing, and of course, viewers and listeners are doing in trying to fight the establishment. You've got to have some fun and keep some lightheartedness in the work that you're doing. Well, Mike, I think you're going to take us away with a look at Javid Javid.
Yeah, okay. So this is the Financial Services Banking Reform Act, which was given royal assent today. It's being presented by the government as a cure-all to the fraud and corruption of the banking sector in Britain. And Sajid Javid, who's the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, is absolutely delighted that the Banking Reform Bill has received royal assent. There we go. I'll get that up even. So he's delighted that the Banking Reform Bill has received royal assent. This is a major milestone and marks the end of a 3-year process led by the government to make the UK banking system stronger and safer so that it can support the economy, help businesses and serve customers. So the Act puts in place the so-called ring fence, which is being presented as bank separation, but of course it isn't. Under true bank separation, as for example implemented under the Glass-Steagall Act in the USA, banks have to make a choice about the type of banking activity that they get involved in, either retail banking or speculative banking. The ring fence goes part of the way towards that, in that a banking group can own and run banking divisions which are allegedly required to be legally and operationally independent from each other. This is supposed to prevent the use of depositors' savings, for example, being used for speculative activity, and it's supposed to protect the retail division from failure if the speculative activities of other parts of the banking group get into trouble. And it's also supposed to prevent the requirement for future government bailout. But unfortunately, Javid followed on by saying, I don't think any minister can sit here and say that now or in the future the state can never have any future involvement in the resolution of a bank. So in fact, the Banking Reform Act doesn't actually provide for that. So let's just have a look at the government's claims about this new act. This is their HM Treasury issued infographic, very graphical that it is. 10 ways we're making the banks work for you. So first of all, they say high street banks will be separate from investment banks, keeping your money safe. Well, I think that's a lie, because of course they won't actually be separate. They will simply be ring fenced. And in fact, it's fair to say that while this primary legislation, this Banking Reform Act is called primary legislation, there's a whole host of secondary legislation which is still to follow, which is the legislation which will eventually give the banks the workarounds, the loopholes to avoid the ring fence. So the banks are absolutely lobbying government at the moment with regard to this future secondary legislation, and we'll see how that pans out in the not too distant future, no doubt. The second thing they say is if a bank fails, its investors will be made to pay, so taxpayers don't have to. Well, we're going to call that a lie as well, because if we've already pointed out, Javid himself has already admitted that that's not the case. Aside from that, we've got to look at what is the definition of an investor. We've already highlighted in the past the fact that in the central bank documentation from all the world's major central banks, recently they've issued documentation pointing out that depositors are considered as unsecured creditors and therefore subject to having their assets seized to bail in future failing banks. And as the recent cooperative bank bail-in highlights, the first target for this type of bail-in is the so-called bondholder, i.e. pension funds and so on. So perhaps taxpayer money, as in money that's gathered by the government from taxpayers, won't be used. Certainly the taxpayer will pay, not the bankers. The next one they say is deposits will be paid back first. Well, yeah, sure. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'm just very skeptical about it. The next one says bankers may face criminal sanctions. Again, another lie. And the reason that I'm saying that that's another lie is, first of all, they're saying may face, they might, possibly. But again, I'm calling this a lie. There's been plenty of opportunity to prosecute bankers for the fraud they've already perpetrated, and no such prosecution has taken place. There's no need for it's just a bit like Leveson in this respect. There's no need for new legislation to enable such prosecutions, and there's no evidence that any such prosecutions will ever happen. The next thing here that I want to highlight out of this lot is this one, and it says that you can switch accounts in 7 days, and this is really a pretty incredible step, because what they're in fact doing is setting up a whole new mechanism for increased tracking of people's financial activities. So in the past, you perhaps had a bank account which was located at a branch, and perhaps the branch staff understood what you were doing on a day-to-day basis with the money flowing in and out of your bank account. But in fact, what they've done is they've taken an extra layer of abstraction now, and they've created these centralized bank accounts which are temporarily attached to a particular bank or branch that you happen to choose to be involved with. And at any point on 7 days' notice, you can move that to any other bank or any other branch. And so what we've got here is more evidence that the banking system is operating as a cartel, and there's no real competition. And although they're saying that this is a pro-competition move, that you can just move to another bank, well, of course, what banks actually provide any kind of different mortgage rate? Is there any significant difference between the kinds of services that the various bank branches provide? No, there isn't. So what this is really about is just making sure that they can keep better track of how money is flowing in and out of the pockets of individuals. And then the final point that I want to make on this infographic is the final option, the final example here. It says the Bank of England is monitoring risks in the financial system so that we don't make the mistakes of the past. Well, I think that's another lie, because I don't think the Bank of England has any idea how to prevent the mistakes that have been made from the past, while at the same time permitting the banks to play the silly games that they've been playing in the past. So this is the new regulatory system. We've got Parliament at the top here, setting the legal and regulatory framework, and holds to account HM, Treasury, and the regulatory bodies. How do they hold them to account? I'm not clear about that. They bring them in front of a committee from time to time, give them a good telling off. Nobody ever actually experiences any kind of prosecution when they break the rules. Then we've got the Chancellor and the Treasury responsible for the legal and regulatory frameworks for all decisions affecting public funds. The same thing could be said there. And then as we move down, we've got the new Bank of England infrastructure, which is the Financial Policy Committee, the Prudential Regulation Authority, and the Financial Conduct Authority, which, again, there's plenty of opportunity for finger pointing. This is your responsibility. Oh, no, it's yours. And in the end, nobody actually gets regulated at all. So we'll see how this works in the future, but I'm just typically pessimistic about short of full bank, proper Glass-Steagall style bank separation with proper assessment of the outstanding debt and dealing with that outstanding debt. We are not moving forward at all, and this is not a forward move. Just by coincidence, on the same day that Britain announces its new banking reforms, the EU is doing the same. So this is the final so-called pillar of European banking union, which creates an EU-wide banking system. The banking union is apparently built on 3 pillars. Quite interesting analogy that they use there. But the first pillar is the European Central Bank appointed as a supervisor for troubled institutions, and that's called the Single Supervisory Mechanism. The second is a so-called resolution regime, which closes failed banks, and that's called the Single Resolution Mechanism. And this new third pillar, and the third pillar is a £100,000 deposit guarantee scheme, so that when they steal the other money that you've got in accounts, then you at least have €100,000 left over. Sorry, it's €100,000, not £100,000. So George Osborne, of course, who was at the meeting that discussed this new bank resolution plan, he is seeking legal protection from the EU so that Britain doesn't have to fund any failed Eurozone banks. And he said, we're not going to stand in the way of the Eurozone banking union as long as the rights of those countries not taking part are properly protected. Well, that's good, isn't it?
Or not.
Or not. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Serco and G4S, well, they, as we've reported in the past, they got caught with their pants down, really, because they were tagging. They had contracts for tagging, if you remember, tagging criminals with these GPS trackers. Unfortunately, they got caught claiming money for people that were not either required to be tagged or, in fact, were already dead. So they got caught in a fraud. And, of course, there were no prosecutions came about as a result of that. They were, in the meantime, banned from taking on any future government contracts until they had a complete review of their governance, their internal governance. Well, that review is complete, and they're hoping that today the government will say that everything that they've done is completely satisfactory and that they will then be allowed to apply for new contracts.
So you've got a criminal company, a company with a criminal track record, simply brought back into the contract process to carry on where it left off.
No criminal prosecutions. They carry on where they left off. In the case of Serco, I understand they are going to pay back £68.5 million. And that's really a bribe in order to get the right to recontract.
So it's no punishment, a little bit of money siphoned off to the side. It's just like I think we were mentioning yesterday, of course, if you've committed a criminal offence in LIBOR, you just give a little bit of money to the services charities and everything's okay again.
Exactly the same type of thing. And how many billions are Serco taking in? And they're throwing £65 million back at the government in order to bribe them into allowing them back into the contractual process again. It's a disgrace, and both these companies should be excluded for a significant amount of time. I would have said unless the government actually prosecutes the people that committed the fraud. But of course, that may open a bigger can of worms.
Well, we could be putting Serco directors for a period of time in their own prisons, which would be an interesting experience for them, of course. Okay.
Okay, moving on to the Ukraine then. This is quite an interesting little story because President Putin has decided that he's going to help the Kiev government stay in power by offering them a $15 billion credit. And they've also slashed a third off the price that they pay for Russian gas supplies. Now, this is quite an interesting move because Russia's economy is like most of the economies in the Western world, although they're considered sort of more Eastern, but nonetheless, they're suffering a little bit at the moment. And in fact, Putin has dipped into what Reuters here is describing as a rainy day fund in order to pay for this bailout. And really what is going on is that Putin is making a geopolitical decision here rather than an economic decision. He is extremely concerned, as we pointed out the other day, that if Ukraine signs deals with the EU, that there will be follow-on deals with NATO, and that NATO will end up putting missile defences, even so-called missile defences, even closer to the Russian border than they already are. And so Putin is putting this money into the Ukraine in the hope that he can at least keep a buffer between what NATO is doing and Russia. It seems to me that this is an escalation of sort of NATO. What are some people calling it? A cool war that's going on at the moment between NATO and Russia.
Yeah.
And this situation is not easing in any way, and there's definitely there is a drive from the West to put pressure on Russia.
But of course, it was Ben Bradshaw at the BBC who reported, well, the Berlin Wall was coming down. That was the end of communism. So there was absolutely no problem as Europe moved into the European Union phase. And now we're beginning to see the absolute lie of that. But of course, we could discuss who's funding it. At the end of the day, it's the British Prime Minister David Cameron who's got overall responsibility, not only for the criminal action amongst the bankers, but the aggression that's being shown overseas. So we thought it would be interesting today to have a little bit of a look at our politicians. And of course, King David is one of our favourite gentlemen. So here he is. He's obviously trying to get to grips with the fact that people have worked out something is going wrong with the sheer scale of immigration. As we always say, don't blame the people who were invited into the country. Let's look at our politicians. So this was the headline: David Cameron joins Sheds raid for illegal immigrants. So unlike several other million people who've known there have been massive problems, particularly around London, with people having to live in appalling conditions due to the fact that the country is simply not geared up for the scale of immigration, David Cameron had to be taken out to see it for himself. He presumably doesn't watch the UK Column Live or read the newspapers. So here's the appalling conditions that immigrants have to suffer in David Cameron's big society. Let's have a look at how David Cameron lives. Well, here he is. This is the Cameron Mansion. And of course, it was the Daily Mail that flagged up that the MP's expensive list reveals that David Cameron used the system to claim $21,000 in a year to pay for his mortgage. Now we say, how can this be? Well, it's pretty easy, because this man is simply low empathy. Yuck. I had to visit naff people who live in sheds. It's good to be back home. To understand what this man is about, you need to understand his psychological makeup. This man simply can't understand why we should be concerned about people who can't feed themselves or have nowhere to live. So if you wonder why he's happy to wine and dine with the corrupt international bankers, well, low empathy, no sympathy, a dangerous man in his own right. And of course, it's getting worse, because here's the Mirror reporting that David Cameron is to go to war with the EU over a controversial drone programme. The EU wants to run its own drone system. But of course, here we are. David Cameron is apparently going to go to war with them in order to stop this. And our comment follows what Mike's just been saying on the legal side. This is lies, lies and more lies, because Cameron is utterly betraying the country at every turn. So lie number one is that the Prime Minister will use a European summit to push back on proposals for Brussels to be given a greater military role. Lie number two is that the Prime Minister will fight any moves that gives the EU an official role. This is in the operation of the drones. And lie number three is that Cameron will insist NATO must remain the cornerstone of the European defence and will resist any talk of combined EU armed forces. These are utter lies. And it was the UK column alone that published and exposed the fact that Cameron had set up the move towards the European army and integration of Britain's armed forces with the French, which was done in secret meetings at the home of the British ambassador in Paris, with the help of what we now understand is a political charity, the Franco-British Council. So if you haven't seen the article, go to the UK Column website and read for yourselves. You can also download the material from the Franco-British Council, in which they are talking about closed-door meetings with politicians and senior military leaders in order to decide Britain's strategic defence post-strategic defence review. So David Cameron, fully aware of this, And of course, he signed up for 50 years defence pact with the French. So to say that he is now going to be holding back on a further drive for integration of the military forces of Europe is an utter lie. And of course, he could only do this with help from Britain's armed forces themselves. So The Guardian here is busy saying that the Defence Chief, UK armed forces have good equipment, but not enough people. Well, I can say from personal experience that this is the sort of drivel that was being given to the armed forces back in the 80s. We have insufficient men, we have insufficient equipment, but this just goes on and on. But somebody's beginning to point the finger. So The Independent here quite rightly saying the British military is becoming a hollow force. But, well, the Chief of the Defence Staff, what are we really talking about? It's the same old thing. We have senior British military officers absolutely watching Rome burn. I presume that's what the purple sash is about. These people are more concerned about their pensions than they are the demise of Britain's military and our ability to defend ourselves. What is this gentleman doing whilst yet more millions of British heavy armour are being left in Europe following the equipment that has been left in Iraq and will shortly be left in Afghanistan? Well, we've warned you repeatedly about the dangers of the government's nudging programme and what it really means. And this was a very interesting article. Council Christmas card warns London tenants to pay your rent. So how would you feel if this had arrived through your door? This is their Christmas card. Don't overindulge this Christmas. Pay your rent. If you're having trouble paying your rent, we want to help. Please call our staff on. Well, actually, it was the Independent that cut off that telephone number. Otherwise, we'd be happy to provide it for our viewers and listeners. This has got to be one of the most despicable things we've seen. Of course, this is not nudging in a pleasant way. This is an attack on people's minds. It's designed to cause stress. This is vicious, but of course it is applied behavioural psychology being run by the British government through this network here. Research it for yourselves. Do have a look at the Mindspace document, which you can download as a PDF on Google. But what the government is saying, they can change people's views and values, and they are very cocky and confident now that the average person will not even know that's happened. So we are saying this is not a Christmas card that we're seeing here. This is the sharp end of dangerous political reframing. But it's up to viewers and listeners to research this for themselves so that you can see and hopefully agree with what we are consistently warning about. Well, Ian Duncan Smith, another classic example, a chum of David Cameron, of course, and he left a Commons debate on food banks early. This was one of the comments from Fiona McTaggart, the Labour MP for Slough. She was describing how people battled over end-of-day bargains in her local Tesco, but what happened, she was almost drowned out by laughter and jeering from the government benches. So do we really need more evidence as to why we've got such terrible problems in Britain when we have these dangerous low empathy people who are prepared to support criminals and paedophiles? Look at the second comment. Tory ministers have been condemned for not taking the plight of Britain's poor seriously after a rowdy Commons debate on food banks, during which the Work and Pensions Secretary Ian Duncan Smith simply refused to answer questions and left early. Why? Well, we come back to this. It's the same attitude of as David Cameron. Yuck, poor people, they make me feel ill. I had to get out of that food debate pretty quickly, I can tell you. These people are dangerous by the fact they have no empathy for their fellow men and women, as long as they're getting their very large parliamentary expenses. They will work for anybody and everybody. Prostitution is the word. Well, this one also caught our eye. The Lib Dems have achieved an amazing turnaround with Lib Dem Simon Hughes being appointed Justice Minister a year after saying he wanted to stay out of government. Let's have a look at the man. Well, here he is. And we just wanted to say, wasn't this the Lib Dem party that was abusing women in the first place? So a nice man to have in charge of justice. But here's the comment from the two clone twins. The Deputy Prime Minister said, Simon will now be able to use his talents inside the coalition, helping the Liberal Democrats to anchor the government in the centre ground and helping us to build a stronger economy and a fairer society, enabling everyone to get on in life. So clearly we've got another man who is using the NLP applied behavioural psychology, totally out of touch with reality, living in his own world and of course using his own language. We decided to speak to EVAW about this incident, and I've lost a gentleman. Where is he? There he is. Let's bring him in again. Because this coalition, a women's group coalition, said that they were going to have a major campaign to deal with abuse and sexual harassment of women. So we gave them a call this morning to see what they made of this new Lib Dem appointment, but we haven't received a reply yet. So we'll look forward to that in due course. Well, one photograph, we're not going to comment a lot on it, but it's very interesting that we've now got senior Saudi diplomats telling us that what's gone on is wrong and that they're now going to take control of the Middle East. Is the gentleman on the left the Duke of Kent? I'm interested as to who that figure is. I think it may be the Duke of Kent. Should we trust any of our policy to the Saudis or indeed our own government? We'll leave that to you to decide. So here he is. David Cameron has announced the creation of a $5 million fund to repair dilapidated war graves. We can't feed people, but here's David's focus. And without undermining any of our thoughts and concerns for those who've died in service of the country, this man seems to be celebrating death. Here he is on a platform in Benghazi, and of course the Mirror had picked up the true cost of David Cameron's war in Libya. Well, here's the BBC about to jump on the bandwagon of a massive celebration of death. And we'll just put up the faces of some of the people who've died in clearly another unlawful war in Afghanistan as a result of Mr. Cameron's policies. It comes down to this, really. Well, there we are. We'll just say it's obvious what's going on in Britain. We have low empathy politicians mixed with criminals, and of course working with money supplied by criminal international banking cartel. It's becoming very clear what the problem is. So for 2014, we're going to be looking at what the solutions are. And I'm going to say part of that is exactly what Robert Greene has been doing, which is getting out there and tackling the issues head on, rather than sitting at home, perhaps emailing a friend. So without more ado, I'm going to say welcome to the studio again, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And thank you for inviting me, UK Column, to speak again. If I just may do, before I forget, I shouldn't forget this. Yeah. It would be remiss of me not to thank all the wonderful people who've supported me over the years, and especially these wonderfully brave women, Holly Gregg and her devoted mother, Anne.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone.
Okay, well, this slide really says it all. Robert Greene has been an absolutely tireless campaigner against child abuse and has been campaigning for justice for Holly Gregg. And as a result of doing that, standing up to protect children and vulnerable young people, you, of course, spent time in prison. Yes, we're not going to go into that side with detail, but for people who perhaps are not aware of you,
yes.
How long were you inside for?
I was sentenced to a year, but I was let out after 3 months, right. To a large extent due to the wonderful support I had with demonstrations,
and
letters.
The basic charge against you, which
it was to causing distress and alarm to members of the public.
Right, and that distress and alarm was caused because you were trying to get the truth out about what had happened to Holly Greig.
Yes, I was. I published the names of those who Holly had named as her abusers because of the failure. They knew of the failure of the police to conduct a proper investigation. And because of the nature of the crimes, I regarded the fact that there's a likelihood that other people could be in danger. Right. And I felt it was right to act. And obviously, I think we've now seen with Jimmy Savile what a pity it was that nobody spoke out about Jimmy Savile when they knew about him.
Well, of course, we're going to just have a little look at part of that in a minute, but we've got the situation, haven't we, where we've had Elm House in London. Yes. We know that politicians were involved. We know that people from the security services, the National Front, Sinn Féin, yes, and high members of the establishment, all closely connected to abuse, but by some miraculous coincidence, the security forces and the police and the establishment can't investigate.
That's right.
That's why, we wonder. Why can't they do that? Well, we better just pop up Eilish Angelini, because this lady has been central to this whole failure to investigate. Yes. She was Lord Advocate, I believe, in Scotland.
Correct, yes.
And you've ended up having to attend a private law hearing as well in relation to this lady.
Yes.
What's she been having to say for herself?
Well, she feels that the fact that I have linked her with the case, and the evidence quite clearly shows that she is linked to it, that again, I've caused a lot of alarm and distress by actually linking her with the case that she claims she wasn't linked to it.
Right.
Simple as that. And so there's yet another attempt to gag me at all costs.
Right. So this lady has now moved south of the border, so she's given up her job in Scotland, and I think she's now with Oxford.
Yes, she's the principal of St Hugh's College in Oxford. And if I may just add, I should perhaps mention another person I think is very, very brave, Timothy Rustage. Tim Rustage. Rusty is known as Prisoners of Conscience International, who had the temerity, he lives in England, of saying, or allegedly saying, that he didn't think Eilish Angelini was worthy of taking a job up in England.
As a result of her failure to act on the Holly Greig case.
That's right, and other issues. Right. Now that is regarded as a crime, because Tim is facing criminal charges as a result of this complaint made against a specific Scottish person in England, taking up a job in England.
Right.
That is now a crime as far as the Scottish authorities are concerned. I would remind everyone that Tim is facing trial on the 24th of February in Aberdeen, and I would appeal for everyone who possibly can to support him in any way possible, as they have supported me. I'm expected to be there to give evidence for Tim, and we'll also expect to have Eilish Angelini brought before the court finally to give evidence under oath, which she refused to do at my trial, and also two of the people named by Holly Greig, Sylvia Major and Wyn Dragon. So it'll be a very, very interesting hearing indeed.
See what comes up. But essentially what we're seeing is that we have a state, both north of the border and south of the border, that says, my goodness, every authority is there to protect children. If you know of children that are being abused, then you must come forward, you must speak out, and we must deal with it, except when you actually do it, and then all of a sudden you become vexatious and a problem and very frightening to these people.
Well, this, of course, is an inversion. What they say and what they mean are two different things. The people who are getting the protection are the perpetrators. There's no question about that.
Yeah. That's child abuse, of course. UK Column, with the help of many other people, have been looking at what's been happening around the suicide of youngsters in South Wales, and the same situation. You would expect that the local MPs would come forward to say, well, this is incredible information that you have here, we need to be deeply concerned. What happens when you provide that information to an MP? They simply don't want to know.
They don't want to know, or they may attack you.
Or they may attack,
Yes, and the victims.
I'll say it at this point, what do you think is happening behind the scenes with the abuse of children?
Well, it's always very, very difficult to know. In fact, it's not impossible to know. We can only speculate. Quite clearly, I think the evidence that we've seen from the Jimmy Savile case, Cyril Smith case and so forth would indicate that there is a concerted effort to protect high-flying paedophiles at all costs. And I do mean at all costs. they must be protected, whatever. I hope that perhaps a few good people, and I think you've seen that the UK column in positions of some authority are beginning to come forward now. Yeah. They're so disgusted with what's happening. But it does need courage for people to speak out. There is no easy way of doing this. We've discussed this before. We're very grateful to all the moral support we have, all the support giving information that helps us, but we do need people to come on the front line as well. You've got to take the bullets, same as I went to prison, but you've got to be prepared for all that. There's no other way. But in order to beat these people, we have to do something on a very tangible basis.
Yeah, if you do nothing, you're effectively condoning what's going on.
Well, you are, and as I made the point earlier about Jimmy Savile case, if some of these people who knew all about Jimmy Savile, and I'm going to include Esther Ranson of Childline particularly there, if they had spoken out when they knew he was up to no good, and this was known for 56 years before his death, how many lives would have been ruined? How they would have spared? Ordeals spared. Lives being destroyed. How many children, vulnerable, sick children, would have been protected if somebody, just one person, had had the guts to speak out about this terrible man?
Yeah, absolutely. If any of you are hearing a little bit of noise in the background, I'm going to have to give you an intermediary weather report because the rain is lashing on the window of our little studio here. So if you want to know what it's like in Plymouth at the moment, it's grim. What we thought we would do is try and give people an easy overview of the Holly Gregg case. None of the original facts have changed. The evidence that was solid in the beginning still stands. But as with all these cases, it's sometimes difficult to see exactly what has taken place. So we thought we would do it in this form. So if we can bring that one up, Mike. What's actually taken place? Well, let's see if this works. In the background, we've got a government that is simply manipulating what goes on with children. So this is to actually soften up people's views on sexuality where children are.
Yes, you could call it, described as state grooming, I think.
State grooming, particularly good. And we see it across a whole range of themes. So we've got education, we've got it coming into the media, we've got a constant failure to actually take the necessary action to deal with porn on the internet. Of course, David Cameron absolutely to blame on this. There's no other way of dealing with it. He's closely aligned to members of Google's senior European staff. They could simply filter this lot out overnight at the flick of a switch. They don't do it because they want the minds of the children. And then the bit that we're coming to in this terrible case with Holly Gregg is that you're encouraging and protecting paedophiles. So here we are, we're failing to investigate high-level rings, which the police are themselves now breaking ranks and saying include MPs, judges, police, senior police figures and establishment figures. What do? We try and get it into people's minds that all paedophiles are dirty old men in raincoats, when actually we know the senior rings are being run with people, huge amounts of money, £38,000 to buy a child in Northern Ireland. That's what we're told at the moment. And the people who should be protecting society, of course, are all assisting in their way with the cover-up. So this is the background to it.
It is indeed. There's no question about it that the biggest threat to our children is this appalling magic circle who have at the present time received de facto immunity from the government.
Yeah. And we'll emphasise what you've been speaking about because here he is, Jimmy Savile. And we just said it's phenomenal if we bring all these characters in. Every one of these people didn't know. Nobody knew. The Queen, of course, has a specialised security unit around her. They didn't know that she was being brought into close contact with a dangerous paedophile. Prince Charles has his own security unit. They didn't know. Princess Diana. This is not believable. And, of course, the police are telling us that senior police units absolutely knew about Savile and other paedophiles, but the police investigating were all warned off. So the Knesset there comes in because, of course, Jimmy Savile was popping over to Israel. We don't know why, but it's very interesting. He had access to Stoke Mandeville and Broadmoor, but nobody knew. Where do we go from here? Should be another one coming up. Here we are. Well, the police, of course, they were having cups of tea. Nobody knew. And as you've rightly pointed out, we've got dear old Esther Ranson, who's suddenly getting a little bit of a grilling in the press because she's all, oh, it's tragic, and I set up Childline to protect these children.
Yes.
Isn't she partly to blame as well?
She is partly to blame. And if I may just add, from a personal point of view, I approached her on a number of occasions to help with the Holly Gregg case, and she did not want to know. There we are.
Well, we've been getting some very, very interesting information about Childline and what actually happens following on from children contacting Childline. And of course, the latest one we've got in is Silverline. I think that's correct.
Yes, indeed, yes.
So we're now going to help vulnerable old people. I wonder whether we should be looking into these two charitable organisations a little more closely.
In fairness, perhaps Ms Ranson is going to make a greater success of protecting the older people than she did over the children. Let's hope so.
We will hope so. So if we have a look at Holly in detail, then this is the simple view of the story. There's no ifs or buts. Holly suffers abuse. Her mother reports that abuse. Holly describes the abuse to Grampian Police. She describes the abuse to a psychologist. She's medically examined, and all those authorities say that she's the victim of sexual abuse.
Indeed, there is no question about that.
And the documents exist to show that, and as a result of your own appearances in court, evidence came into those court cases to reinforce this. So where do we go from here? Well, the police briefly interview the father but ignore 21 other individuals identified by Holly.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. They then describe their own actions as a thorough investigation.
That is so, and that has been confirmed by the Lord Advocate to a member of the government in Westminster.
Right.
A thorough investigation.
Thorough investigation, okay. And where does that then lead us? Well, over here, that now I believe you put the question to the Chief Constable of Scotland, what is the minimum action to be expected of a police investigation into serious sexual assault where the perpetrators are identified? And what was the reply to that?
No reply whatsoever yet. Chief Constable Sir Stephen House, appointed in April to control the whole of Scotland, has yet to respond to this basic question. And all it is if a victim or an alleged victim describes the number of people who have the names of those who have allegedly assaulted her, would it not be the basic requirement for the police to actually interview those people who are named?
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. And to a certain extent, that's all there is to the Holly Gregg campaign, really.
The police still do not want to answer that question.
No, they will not answer that question. Right. This is the man responsible for the safety of 5 million British citizens living in part of the United Kingdom. And I think those 5 million people deserve protection. And they deserve the protection from the Westminster government if the devolved Scottish government are unwilling or incapable of doing so.
And of course, the situation in Scotland since this terrible incident took place has actually worsened because, of course, we now can't take a complaint from one police force to another one. No. They've all been amalgamated in Police Scotland in one huge pyramid.
Indeed. So this basic sort of protection that the public have had does not exist in Scotland. Right. There's nobody to invest the Police Scotland but Police Scotland. How can that be right?
Okay. Well, Mike, if you just pop that one back on screen, thank you. So while this terrible story was unfolding, we've put a picture of Eilish Angeline. What made her complicit in what was happening, or?
Well, what made her complicit in what was happening is that we have documents from MSP Brian Adam, who had written to her about the case going back in 2000 and 2001. And we even have a record of her writing to Anne Gregg's solicitor on the 12th of July 2001. And this is a case that she later claimed she knew nothing about or had no input into.
Right.
It's a downright lie.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on some documents here. So this is one of the key things that has sort of taken place since Holly's abuse. So evidence emerges in a trial, your trial on the 16th of January, that not one of the 22 alleged perpetrators was questioned. Just tell us in your own words about this.
Well, under cross-examination from my QC and Mr. Andy Lamb, DC Lisa Evans, who interviewed Holly in my presence on the 8th of September 2009, confirmed when asked by Mr. Lamb that not one of the people named by Holly, the 22 perpetrators, had been questioned as a result of those allegations.
Right, so again, there's no ifs or buts about this. This came out as evidence.
That is right. And in a way, that's why I had to go to trial, to get to confirm this evidence on oath. Not only that, but 9 of the named perpetrators by Holly were brought forward by the prosecution to testify against me. And again, Mr. Lamb asked all 9 of them, have you been questioned by the police as a result of the allegations against you made by Holly Greig? All confirmed, no, we have not.
Right, but you get 9 people brought against you for trying to protect a vulnerable Down syndrome girl who's been horribly abused, whereas nothing is brought against, or any form of proper investigation against people that she named as abusers.
None whatsoever.
It's a good system, isn't it? Welcome to justice in Britain. Now, we've got, these are some documents that have been shown before. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but what we are showing all the time is we're talking evidence-based. We are not talking hearsay. So we've got this one here from Criminal Investigation Division. And the bit we're interested should come up on the screen here. Now, some of this is very explicit, but we're either dealing with the facts or we're not. Medical evidence. Tell us about this one.
Yes, well, I'll read this if I may. On the 20th of May 2000, Holly was examined by Dr. Francis Kelly, now retired, but then retained by Grampian Police as a forensic medical examiner. Dr. Kelly found that there was evidence of previous penetration of Holly's private parts. She signed a formal certificate to that effect. A copy is attached for your information. Clearly, there is no medical evidence of who or by whom over what period this time has occurred. But that was not Dr. Kelly's job to do that. She just had to look at the medical
facts.
The investigating officer at the time and others who have conducted further inquiries since were all of the opinion that Holly had been the victim of penetrative sexual abuse at some point in the past. As can be seen from her statement, she named her father, Dennis Mackey, as the perpetrator. Although further inquiries were carried out, there was never a sufficiency of corroborative evidence to make prosecution of any person viable. Well, they probably wouldn't be if people's computers weren't checked, if no forensic evidence was checked, and the number of people who were named by Holly were not even questioned. How could there be?
And these are all documents which are now in the public domain and through the court cases.
Absolutely.
It goes on here, so the naming of the father is in here. So we're saying we're not talking hearsay, we're talking fact. And of course, you were present at one of the key police interviews with Holly.
Yes, I was on the 8th of September 2009, which she has some speech difficulties, some hearing difficulties, but she made her testimony very, very clear indeed. There's no question about the identities, even locations and so forth. So there's no question
and here we've got the fact that she was regarded as a truthful witness and an entirely innocent victim. She was distressed.
Yes.
So no ifs or buts in what we're seeing here, and this is the establishment putting down the evidence.
That's right, and I think it's very important to confront any possible people who might still have any doubts. I'm not quite sure see why they would have. But I have based the whole of my campaign on evidence. It's not whether I believe Holly or anything like that. I believe her because the experts say she is a truthful witness, and there is no reason not to believe her because of her particular condition of Down syndrome.
We come back again and again to this key question that against this background of evidence, why is it the Grampian Police have been allowed to simply not investigate? We've been reporting over the last week in particular that it's emerging that police forces in England have simply been manipulating the crime figures by fluffing, I think was one of the terms, but fiddling or not carrying out a proper investigation. And UK Column at the moment holds further evidence, police documentation, which proves, for example, that Thames Valley Police simply got around the sexual abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College by simply not recording them as crimes.
Yes, this is how it happens.
So we've got another one here. Mike, just pop this one up. This is, I think this is part of a, excuse me, sorry, where are we? I have got my glasses back today. So this is a copy of a report from Jack Boyle and Eve Harding. This is the key part of it here.
Yes, well, it's actually from Enable, the solicitor who is representing Holly, who represent people with disabilities in Scotland. Nicola Smith was the name of the solicitor.
So we got two people, both are of the view that Holly is telling the truth and she's been sexually abused.
That they have, yes. And I think it's important to note, if I may at this stage, that both of those reports were withheld from the prosecutor by Grampian Police, one of which specifically named as a probable abuser a senior police officer.
Right, okay. We've got another assessment document. Oh, sorry, hold on, Mike, wait a minute. We'll just go back here. This is the one here.
Yes.
So this was carried out at a medical centre.
This is Dr. Jack Boyle, actually, who is regarded as one of the most eminent experts in the whole of Scotland.
Right, we're not apologising. Some of this is pretty graphic, but there was something very strange going on in the background with other family members.
That is right, and that is which I will read to you now. It's not very pleasant, but I'm afraid that it is what we're up against here. There is some background information that may be relevant. It is noted that Greg, that is Holly's brother, has a conviction for masturbating in a public place. This is psychologically an extremely serious matter, although from a criminal point of view, it may not quite have the same significance. Now, what is important about that is that took place in 1997, 3 years before Holly made her allegations. So here are the police in 2000 receiving a complaint against an individual who already was being found guilty of a previous unrelated sexual offence. Yet they did nothing about it.
And I believe I'm right in saying that the incident is actually regarded as a cry for help, actually. So if we're going down the middle here, there's...
Yes, I think it's very difficult because we can only speculate here, and that was perhaps not a terribly wise thing to do, but the general feeling is that the person concerned, the brother, perhaps wanted to be caught because he was so distressed about what was happening and what he had witnessed. We're only guessing at that. But I think when Dr. Boyle mentioned that psychologically very serious, I think that's what he was getting at.
Right, and I think I'm just going to add to that Bill Maloney from Pie and Mash Films, of course, who's a phenomenal campaigner for protecting children. He knows only too well the abuse system, having been in it together with siblings, but he believes that actually an amnesty for many of the paedophiles is a way forward so that we can actually get to the people at the top, the people running the rings and the trafficking of children. So I'm just going to put that in there to say that although we are going very strongly to say that the perpetrators of abuse against Holly should be brought to justice, we are aware that there are influences on people which can turn them to this type of abuse.
Well, that is the hold that they tend to have on people. They turn victims into perpetrators themselves. And when the victims want to speak out, the people who are really running these rings will actually say, well, it's not a good idea for you to tell the police because you're going to go to prison as well if you do that. And that's the hold that they tend to have on people.
Pretty horrific stuff.
It is horrific, yes.
Now, what's this one we've got here? This is another... I think we'd be able to expand this a bit. Sorry, we're having a little trouble with the text ourselves. There we are.
Well, I don't want to sort of promote Holly's Greg's case rather than other cases, but it is unusual in the fact that there is a direct link in the cover-up to a leader of a country, and this is Alex Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland. We have a document from October 2007 showing that he knew about the case. We also have a document that, based on what I sent to him on the 20th of June 2009, confirmation by the Crown Office that he received that document. I personally handed him all the documents that you've seen, key documents, on the 1st of May 2011 in front of hundreds of people in Perth, and he used the words, yes, thank you, I'll have a look at those. And of course, subsequently, action was taken against them by the Freedom of Information Commissioner for the refusal of the Scottish Government to actually acknowledge this and to take action over the Holly Gregg case. Okay. I think we have some headlines there. This is from Mr. Woods, after I'd sent all the documents to Mr. Salmond's constituency office. And there we are, they're going to deal with this as promptly as possible. 18th of October, we're now 2 months on, and I have no response.
And this is the serious issue of child abuse, which everybody stands up against. We mustn't let this happen, except when they're told about it, and then everything goes deathly silent.
That is right.
Well, luckily, we've got some other very good, what do we describe them? Publishers, periodicals, who are speaking out. And I know that you've got a lot of respect for the firm in this.
Yes, they have. They're a very respected legal magazine. It's not generally read by the public in general, but the legal people in Scotland tend to read this avidly. And they've been very courageous indeed in supporting this. And in fact, the editor, the former editor, Stephen Rayburn, was one of the witnesses, the only witness I was allowed to have to support my case at my trial.
Okay, so we've got this one from the 1st of October 2010. The headline is Angelini resigns. The Lord Advocate, Eilish Angelini, has announced she's stepping down with effect from the next Hollywood elections in May 2011. So what's the significance of this? It goes on to say there, actually.
Yes, it does. There has been there was an attempt to find out how she paid for her solicitors, a firm called Levy and McRae, to threaten members of the media in Scotland and also outside Scotland as well. And I know that the UK column were threatened as well, to stop them talking about the Holly Gregg case fundamentally, and particularly Eilish Angelini's involvement in it. And it is not known to this day whether she used her own money, which she should have done because it's a personal action, or whether taxpayers' money was misappropriated.
Right.
And they failed to answer appropriately for the Information Commissioner about these funds.
Right, so the final paragraph there in the middle of the screen says the firm understands she's presently facing further action in respect of a failed appeal against a decision by the Information Commissioner not to disclose whether she used her own or taxpayers' funds in legal actions against the media.
That is correct. We still do not know the answer of that.
Yeah. So unlike ordinary individuals, they get pinned down and eventually say, well, you know, I did or I didn't. These people just hide behind a wall of silence.
That is it, correct. Exactly.
And what about the next one here? Exclusive. Information Commissioner forces the government response to Holly Gregg inquiries.
That's right. Well, this was a question asked by the Freedom of Information Commissioner to what the First Minister and his government knew about the Holly Gregg case and the failure to take any action, to play a dead bat. That is, they made the point about Holly receiving money from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, and make the point that the Detective Inspector in charge of the case, Ian Alley, described as a truthful witness to the best of her ability and an entirely innocent victim. So why did nothing happen?
And this is not UK column reporting it. We've now got a very respected, highly respected organisation north of the border. And they did a bit more here. First Minister, yes. Where are we? First Minister in missing records riddle. I'll just about manage that. Missing records riddle over Holly Gregg abuse allegations. So this is in the public domain. This is not some gossip over the internet as to what went on with this young lady.
Official placed there by Her Majesty the Queen, making an inquiry to the government, one of her, the government of Scotland, right, the First Minister and his government.
And we've just blown that up because this sentence down here is the one that you were particularly...
Yes, indeed. And I will read this to you. This is the one that...
when did you first become aware of the allegations?
Last month, the Scottish ministers were compelled by the Information Commissioner to address a series of questions put to the First Minister in correspondence in relation to the case in January this year, the first of which was, when did you first become aware of the allegations made by Holly Gregg about her being abused by members of a high-ranking paedophile ring in Scotland? The records seem to have gone missing, of course, but we do have a document from October 2007, quite clearly from the First Minister's own office, quite clearly indicating that he was fully aware of that and had been fully aware of that for over 4 years before that.
Right, and the firm is not going to be putting these sort of articles together if they're unsure as to what the whole thing's based on in the first place.
They're very careful indeed about what they publish. Yeah. I know that from experience.
And I'm going to say that I'm pretty disgusted at the way we have seen many people who clearly have not done their homework on the evidence around the Holly Gregg case, making accusations and indeed trying to unseat you and the work you've been doing.
Yes.
What do they know? Nothing. Are they protecting children? No. What they're doing is attacking other people who are trying to get these high-level paedophiles levered into the public view.
I mean, really, just to expand on that, the only question I repeat on this is the only way you could actually argue against it, based on the evidence and my own actions, is if you genuinely believe that people identified as being sexual abusers should not be questioned by the police. If that is your position, you should say so. Anybody who thinks that people who've been identified accused of rape or any other sex offences should be questioned by the police, they're on the same side as me. As simple as that.
Well, this is true, but of course we haven't really got, well, we've got a couple of the MPs that have shown interest and the rest.
Yes.
So this is a bit more of reports from the firm. If we bring that up on screen, I think we can just highlight, here we are, I'll read it out for you. The correspondence questioning the First Minister was sent on the 28th of January and received no response despite a series of reminder letters. The Information Commissioner later ruled that the Scottish ministers had failed to comply with their obligations under Section 10(1) and 21(1) of the Freedom of Information Act. So,
very serious in that, because on the 11th of July, it really literally meant, and the Freedom of Information Commissioners confirmed this, that the Scottish Government were possibly within 24 hours of facing criminal prosecutions over contempt of court. That's how serious it is. Yet that information, apart from the firm, to the people in the legal profession, was not relayed to the people of Scotland. No. At the moment, Mr. Salmond is making a great fuss of standing for independence, and I've got co-comment about that. That's a matter for the Scottish people. But I think the Scottish people deserve to know some of the things that Mr. Salmond has failed to do or has been up to in the past, and I think this is one of them. If this were made a headline, and it's already in the public domain by the Scottish media, I think Mr. Salmond would have great difficulty in retaining his position as First Minister.
Well, we see more and more evidence of the constant cover-up, of course, of fraud, our little brown envelopes moving around. Yes. We're not talking about little brown envelopes here, we're talking about the serious sexual abuse of children. What does the establishment do? Lie and cover up. So we've got another psychological report here that we thought we would bring into the equation. If you can pop that one up. Will this one expand? I think so. So this is a report prepared at the request of Nicholas Smith.
Yes. That is the one by Dr. Eva Harding.
So, a chartered educational child psychologist of 30 plus years experience who's assessed many people with serious learning difficulties. I've also experienced working with and assessing many children and adults who've survived childhood sexual abuse. And this is the key bit that this lady came up with.
Sorry, that's another one. Actually, that comes from the Commissioner's report, actually.
This is from the Commissioner's report
about not divulging crucial information, including that of Dr. Harding, to the prosecutor.
Right, okay.
But
so basically, but what's being highlighted here is that documents and reports were not seen by the Procurator Fiscal.
They were not seen by the Procurator Fiscal, and of course I should add that this particular report and that of Dr. Jack Boyle, which we referred to a little earlier, were actually sent to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, and they based their award to Holly as a victim on those two key documents, the same two documents that the police withheld from the prosecutor.
Right.
What does that say? Yes.
It's a cover-up.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, it's a cover-up. Why would you want to cover up child abuse? Because you're obviously protecting friends, chums and colleagues within the establishment. There's no two ways about this.
Well, this is the point. I mean, when people talk about Jimmy Savile, they sometimes make this slightly erroneous assumption that it's because of who he knew. It's more important than that. It's what you know about who you know. Yeah. That is the key.
The key thing.
Exactly.
Robert, I've got an eye on the clock because you have a train to catch.
Yes.
I know that you are very keen to talk about Lockerbie with us.
Yes, I am.
If you want to just mention it for 30 seconds, and I'll say that we'll get you back in the new year to have a special look at Lockerbie. And it's a little web of information coming out here.
It is. Basically, the three people who've been currently trying to cover the case up are, again, Mr. Salmond, the Justice Secretary Kenny McCaskill, and, of course, the former Lord Advocate Elisha Angelini. Mr. El Megrahi, of course, quite clearly was an innocent man. He should never have been convicted. And this has been known for about 8 years now.
Right.
And I must perhaps add the courageous efforts of Dr. Jim Swire, whose daughter was tragically killed on that terrible night 25 years ago. He's been absolutely magnificent, and he's stood up to try and have a man who had effectively alleged to have murdered his daughter, an innocent man, to try to get him released, which I think is a wonderful and humane gesture. And for the information of those perhaps in the London area, there is a memorial service which Dr. Swire will be attending on Saturday night, the 21st of December, 6:45 at Westminster Abbey.
Right, okay. Well, I'm going to say, Robert, thank you again for coming in and talking about the work that you've been doing. Tremendously important that we all take on this burden of exposing the paedophile rings which are operating through our government systems. And I'm going to say also a very big thank you to the policemen and women who are speaking out and challenging their own senior officers as to why senior policemen and women are closing down investigations into paedophile rings, which includes, I'm going to say, our very own politicians. So thank you for doing that. You deserve our encouragement and support. Keep going. We'll leave it there, Robert.
Thank you, Brian.
We'll get a car. We'll get the car round as soon as possible because you're going to be in a bit tight, I think. Thanks very much for joining us. If you don't know what the Holly Gregg case is about, please look at Robert's material in his blog and also check the UK column. But I warn you, at the moment there are many people who want to cover up this serious abuse case, and they will use every and any means to do so, which includes lies, covering up false information and attacks on Robert himself. So don't fall for it. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.